Have you heard the expression, you can't live with them and you can't live without them? Relationships. They are the source of excitement and encouragement, and they are also exhausting and difficult to manage. So, we're going to learn about interpersonal communication. You can take a whole course on this here at TCC. You can even study this at universities and get a degree in interpersonal. So, this video is going to just define interpersonal and types of relationships. Our second video is going to go over relational dynamics and some of the skills that will help us with our interpersonal communication. And our last video, we'll go over Mark Knapp's model of relationship development and maintenance. Interpersonal communication, you received a very brief definition of this back in our very first chapter, which is communication between two people. Interpersonal communication is different than intra, I-N-T-R-A, is our self-talk. We also learned about that earlier in this semester. But when we talk about interpersonal communication, not only is it just between two people, but we're differentiating it between impersonal. Impersonal, you'll see down at the very bottom of your slide, refers to communication that treats people as objects. The "hey, how are you" welcoming greeting phrase that you say to everybody is really impersonal, not interpersonal. So how do we become interpersonal instead of impersonal? When we're communicating with another person, if it involves quality, actually adapting the message to the specific person that you're talking to, it usually involves some sort of mutual influence. And there is a purpose behind interpersonal, which is to initiate and either maintain or manage our relationships. So interpersonal is a little bit more specific and geared towards a particular person. Even if you don't know their name, if you're adapting your conversation to that person and it goes beyond the "hi, how are you, what's the weather like today," which would be impersonal. That is, in a nutshell, the difference. Obviously, there are different types of relationships. You already know this, but the book does elaborate on these a little bit and gives you a few more tips because not all relationships are treated the same. Communication is different and how we approach things are different. So there are tips in your text on friendships, romantic relationships, family relationships, which is the big one, and online relationships. These are areas that you can study further at a lot of universities, although our interpersonal communication class does dive into some of this in more in depth. I do want to look at a couple of things about romantic, loving type relationships. And this does not necessarily apply exclusively to romantic relationships, but this is information that I've learned over time that I really like. It's not in your textbook, so it's here for your use and your consideration. What I find really fascinating, if you actually study Greek, the word love actually has a lot of different words, not just one word. We use love for "I love ice cream" and "I love you," and I don't think that really expresses and communicates how we feel. We're limited with that word, and language sometimes does do that. So in Greek, there are many words for love. Phileo is one. The city of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania is named after phileo, which is brotherly love. And so there are different Greek words to represent love. And so it's much better in as far as communication in Greek because it's more specific. There's brotherly love. There's sort of the love that like God has for his people. Then there's sexual or erotic kind of love. And so they have real specific words that makes it easier to interpret. So it's a fascinating area in the area of language, in linguistics even. that I just thought I would call your attention to, because how do you tell somebody and explain really clearly that you love them versus loving ice cream, right? Because our language limits us. So that's sort of our challenge, is how do we learn to communicate how we feel about another person? And another thing that I find fascinating is this idea of love languages. This is a book. Actually, he has a series of books by Dr. Gary Chapman. He's a licensed counselor, therapist, and he suggests that we have different ways we like to give and receive love. He says there are 5 of these love languages. There are words of affirmation, positive words, quality time, acts of service, gifts, and physical touch. And it doesn't mean that you only have 1 or 2 of these. All of these are probably important in every relationship. However, you probably have 1 or 2 that are your primary love languages. And there's a quiz that you can take to help you learn about this. Here's what the challenge is. The challenge is we often tend to love other people in our own love language. So, for example, my love languages are quality time and gifts. I love to receive gifts. I love quality time. And so, therefore, I tend to give gifts to other people, or I try to give time to my friends. But if my friends are words of affirmation, they may not understand that I'm demonstrating my care and concern for them because I'm not using affirming words. That's what they think love is. So if I'm not using affirming words, then they're not understanding my message, right? So that's our challenge. If you can figure out what somebody's love language is and you can communicate that in a way that they understand, then they're going to hear it or feel it in a more concrete way. It's not so vague or abstract. So this is something that you can look into if you'd like. They have love languages for teens and children, and he's generated a few different books, but you could check that out if you want. I love his work and this concepts, and I think it's a good thing that you can use in a practical way, although it's certainly not a requirement for this class. You're also learning a little bit about how we form relationships and how we choose relational partners. In this chapter that we're studying here, we're talking about all relationships. So that's everybody from friends, family, coworkers to romantic. And so unless we specifically say romantic, we're using a general definition of relationships for all intents and purposes. So you're going to learn a little bit more about this, obviously, in your text. There are, we form relationships. We are not created to be an island. We are created to be connected with people. We have that inner need for connection. But relationships are good for our psychological and our physical health. It's also good for healing. And so you can read more about that in your text. They also help us with meeting needs and achieving our goals. And then we also form relationships partially due to attraction. There are all kinds of different attractions. It's not always physical attraction. You could certainly admire people's skills or their sense of humor, right? You can admire their qualities and be attracted to qualities. It doesn't always have to be physical. So attraction is very broad in our definition, but we usually are connecting with other people. There's usually an element of some kind of attraction. Again, it doesn't have to be physical attraction. Some sort of admiration or acknowledgement of something, like you love somebody's cute outfit and they're really styled great, right? You could be attracted to that quality. But we tend to connect with people based on proximity. Of course, physical attraction is an element, and similarities. And so your book will elaborate a little bit more on each of those. And when you look at this definition of attraction and at the bottom of your slide, it's a motivational state causing someone to think, feel, and usually behave in a positive manner towards another person. So I think that is a good basic foundation for our understanding of attraction. Here's just a few tips on how we choose people to be connected with. Oftentimes, you meet somebody at work or in class and you find something you have in common, and we're a little bit more limited when we're online or limited in our face-to-face and social distancing. But we tend to consider attractiveness usually is an issue. Having something in common, you learn and you figure out you balance each other out. A person likes and appreciates us. You admire the other person's abilities. They feel comfortable talking to you, and vice versa, that you see the person frequently and you find the relationship is rewarding. We're going to look at several different models and theories in this chapter. One is social exchange theory. We're going to see that in our next video. But there are benefits to being connected with other people. There's also costs, but we obviously want to be connected with those people that benefits us in some way. And so we are going to be diving into more specifics on some of these theories and how to connect and manage with other people. And we will dive in to some of those things in our second video.